Nigeria's steel sector comes under our scrutiny. Despite the huge funds invested in the project, Nigerians are wondering whether it will ever see the light of day or become water down the drain. Is there enough political will, mandate, and resources to make a difference in a sector believed to have defied all odds in a long-drawn bid to set forth the nation as an industrial hub in Africa? Well, the Minister of Steel Development, Prince Shuaibu Audu, joins us live on Arise Prime Time. Prince, glad to have you join us.
Thank you very much, Indy, for having me this evening.
Yeah, let's start with your vision to transform Nigeria into a regional steel powerhouse.
Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has a vision to transform Nigeria into an industrial powerhouse, like you rightly mentioned. Part of the president's desire to grow the economy to $1 trillion by 2030 in 5 years is hinged on the steel sector, which is the bedrock for industrialization. It can help us to achieve that. It's also a sector that can create hundreds of thousands of jobs. We're also targeting to create about 500,000 jobs by 2030, both direct and indirect jobs. And you know, the measures we're putting in place, the several measures that we're putting in place is going to help us to work towards achieving that within the shortest possible time.
Let's just briefly tell us the measures before we go to the question of the debt I just mentioned a while ago.
Yes, we're doing a number of things. If you look at the legacy assets, steel assets that were privatized in the early 2000s that have been dormant and haven't been working, the president has given us a mandate to revive those steel plants and steel assets, and we're working very hard on Ajokuta, on National Iron Ore Mining Company, on Delta Steel, which is now called Premium Mines and Steel, on Aluminium Smelter Company of Nigeria, and on the steel rolling mill. So on those 5 key assets and key components, we're working very hard as a federal government to make sure that those legacy steel assets are back on track within the shortest possible time.
Nigeria, I hope I'm correct. If I'm wrong, you tell me. Nigeria has about 21 steel mills, right?
The total bouquet of steel companies, including steel mills, fabricators, everything is about 92, 95, so about 100. But for steel mills to specific, as a subset, you're probably right, around 20-something.
21, okay.
Yes.
But it finds it difficult to fully exploit its potential for industrial development due to what you have called, I think it was during the summit, operational integrated steel plants as off-takers. You want to explain that?
Yeah, so basically what we're saying, operational integrated steel plants as off-takers, is that once we produce iron ore from the ground, you know, backward integration, we need to be able to have steel companies, locally based steel companies that can uplift some of this iron ore, dolomite, clay, and things like that, that can now be converted into, you know, iron ore with a proper backward integration process. 1 or 2 companies are doing that, but it's very, very limited. So we want to create policies and framework that would ensure that that happens on a larger scale across Nigeria.
You're on it now.
Yes, yes.
All right. Ajokuta, like he said, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Steel, Patrick Ndebweze, he talked about Ajokuta being indebted to $2 billion in electricity, yet not producing steel. Like I said, coming from the chairman. So, how was this debt acquired? Has it been paid off?
You know, as you know, Ajokuta has been, you know, has had several...
I don't know whether to call it dormant or dead.
Yes, I mean dormant. I would say dormant to a certain extent. But these are the issues. Let me just explain. So these light bills, electricity bills were accumulated over the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years.
10 to 15
Yes. Most of that component is basically interest, you know. So if you annualize it on an annual basis, you know, it comes to about 200 or so million per annum, which is still high. Now, Ajokuta is ramping up light bills and electricity bills because it sits at the edge of the river bank, the River Niger. So there's water that goes into it through the underground channels. If you don't use the power and the light to drain the water, the plant will sink. You know, and there are also underground cables and things like that that needs to be serviced. So basically, those electricity bill is being spent to keep Ajokuta afloat, to keep it, you know, afloat, as opposed to allowing the plant to sink.
Go under, yeah.
Yes, to go under. So I think it's very important to make that clarification. Yeah. So it's not like it's not based on production that is producing at a large scale. Although at a certain point in time over the last 15 or so years, some of the integrated units were producing, like the light section mill and things like that, where it was producing iron rods up to a certain extent. But that needs to be revamped. We need to take it through a privatization process, find an investor that will help us to, you know, get the plant working very quickly again.
So in a way, you might then say, okay, resources were not particularly. It was just to keep it afloat.
Yes, it was
even
just
though it was not in use.
Correct. It was to keep it afloat, primarily to prevent it from sinking as a steel plant.
Which would have been a
Which
worse
would have been,
outcome.
yes, which would have been. So it's the lesser of the two evils.
Evils,
Yes.
like you put it.
Yeah.
Well, despite our vast natural endowments in iron ore, limestone, and coal, Nigeria imports over 90% of the steel it consumes. That's a very high figure. What efforts have you made or plans to change this narrative?
Well, as you pointed out, or as you referred to very briefly on the National Steel Summit, we had an inaugural National Steel Summit, the first in our history in Nigeria, yesterday and today, yes. It lasted 2 days. The Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Senator Kashim Shettima, represented Mr. President. I had my colleagues at the Federal Executive Council also present. And basically, the idea was to set a roadmap and a blueprint. We issued a communique at the end of the session, basically to provide a direction in terms of where we would like to take the steel industry to. There is massive potential. There are massive opportunities. If you look at some of the things that we've done on Ajokuta, if you take Ajokuta, for example, we have already contracted out the technical and financial audit to be done. So that process is ongoing. I was present at the groundbreaking ceremony in March 2025 this year, where 5 mini LNG plants were launched and a $500 million investment was brought in. We're at very advanced stages with the Ministry of Defense to set up a military industrial complex and produce military hardwares by signing the MOU. And the last thing on that as well is that we also want to create an industrial park where it would have a free trade zone and a gas park. So there's a lot of hope with regards to steel. When you come to aluminium, we've had extensive discussions with Aluminium Smelter Company of Nigeria, the management team, where they've made a proposal to invest $465 million over the next 6 years. So we're making, we've brought in significant investments on the one hand. On the other hand, there are proposals on the table that the president is looking at to bring additional investments. We've also had a commitment from Inner Galaxy Group that has invested $400 million in a steel plant in Ogun State. So we're taking decisive measures. And I think the final thing in that regard is regulatory policy measures and bills that we're trying to pass at the National Assembly, primarily the metallurgical industry bill, to ensure that we're able to have a regulatory framework that will guide the industry into the future.
At what stage are you on that?
It has gone through the second reading. We had another session with National Assembly members a couple of months ago, about 3 months ago or so. And we're taking it through the bureaucratic process, but we're confident that we'll get it done and we'll get it passed.
You talked about MOU.
Yes.
Talk to us about the memorandum of understanding you signed with the original equipment manufacturers, OEM of the plant.
Yes. Just to clarify this point, we signed an MOU in September 2024 with the OEM, the original equipment manufacturers, TPE of Russia. However, as you know, Russia has been significantly distracted by the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yeah.
And we don't want to put Nigeria at a disadvantage. So we're at the crossroads. So what we've done now, as directed by Mr. President, is to also have strategic discussions with China. China is the biggest steel producer in the world, where they are producing over 1 billion metric tons. So I was in Beijing in China in June this year, 2025, where I met with about 4 or 5 different large-scale, Chinese steel companies, both public and private, together with the DG of Nigeria-China Strategic Partnerships. And, we're having ongoing conversations where at the end of the process, we'll present all the options to Mr. President to make a decision that is in the best interest of Nigeria. So we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. Yes, we signed an MOU, but it's an MOU. We're having strategic discussions with China, whoever is going to give us money, because the federal government, as you know, does not have the resources to be able to revamp it. Billions of dollars are required. So we need an investor that will come in and bring money to help us to get this off the ground.
You've gone ahead of me, because I was going to ask you that you've extended your search to private investors in China for the plant's resuscitation. And I was going to ask you, why China, and how far or near are you in this search? Maybe you should then add how near you are on this search.
Yeah.
Because I think you have answered why China.
Correct. I've answered why China. I don't think we're too far off. The president is anxious for us to get it done quickly. We would have some of their personnel on ground in the next month or so to come and have discussions. I have been there. They are going to send senior executives to the ground. We'll also go to Ajokuta and they would also take a look at it and have first-hand experience. But we're confident that Ajokuta can work. It's a massive project that is a game changer for Nigeria.
That's what Nigerians want to hear.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's been not brain trainer, it's been a resources trainer over the years.
It's been quite unfortunate, for nearly 50 years. It was 98% complete, and the country turned its back on the project.
98% complete?
98% completed, yes.
And then the country turned its back?
And the country turned its back.
What was the reason?
The reason was there was no political will until this government came.
After wasting so much
wasting so much money, the federal government then, believed that there was no point investing money into steel production. That sounds almost preposterous now, but that was the view of the federal government when they decided to pull out of the, Ajokuta transaction. I remember when Ajokuta was built, it was built by civilians. When, the project, after the Shehu Shagari regime, there was a military takeover, and things that had to do with, military juntas and things like that. He also delayed or scuttled the project. So these were some of the challenges that we had.
The president says government is eyeing 10 million tons liquid steel production by 2030. That's 5 years from where we are now. This is 2025.
Correct.
Is that feasible, and where are we presently, and what's your roadmap to achieve this target?
I believe is and I'm confident that it's very much achievable. We're currently producing about 2 million metric tons of steel annually. Basically, if we're able to bring some of the government-owned, steel plants back on track, including Ajokuta, including Delta or Premium Steel, which can produce about 1.2 million metric tons, as well as scale up some of the private sector players in Nigeria. There are a couple of private sector players that are also doing, quite well.
I'm going to get to that.
Yes. So if we aggregate all of that, we're very confident, and Mr. President is very confident that we can achieve the 10 million metric tons by 2030 with all hands on deck. But the critical thing is that we need private sector support. As a government,
now
we
let
can
me
lead
ask
the
you
charge.
that straight
Yes.
out, now
Yes.
that you have talked about it.
Yes.
So let me ask you, what's your plan for the private sector participation to drive the industry's investment and revitalization?
Yeah.
And what encouragement
Yeah.
are you dangling at them? Because, like they said, there's no free meal. And I
Correct.
mean, the reason for private investors is ROI.
Correct.
So what are you dangling
Correct.
before them?
Yes, we're putting measures in place to ensure that it's attractive to a private sector investment to bring in funding, whether it's tax and duty waivers on their equipment or capital allowances or reduction of corporate income tax and things like that. We're creating fiscal incentives, and fiscal incentives must be created to ensure that private sector players bring in the funding, because we need private sector investors to enable us to be able to turn around the industry and achieve our objectives. Because, as you know, steel is a capital intensive industry. So we definitely need private sector players to come and support government. And, we're very willing to cooperate with the private players to ensure that we achieve our desires.
How much of a role can the academia play in improving the fortunes of this industry? Do they have a role?
Yes, absolutely. They have a very important role. Today was a day that we had about 3 panel sessions, right? And, most of the panel sessions were academia's professors of methodology and steel and all of that. And, even in terms of skill development, training, staff, people that are going to man the steel plants and all of that.
Innovations and research.
Yes, innovations and research. Even testing some of those steel products that are produced to ensure that, they are not substandard or they don't collapse, those equipments, operating those equipments, the academia is going to play a big role. So we need the support of academia, we need the support of, the private sector investors, and we need the support of semi-skilled and skilled manpower or labor.
All right, let's talk about Nigerians patronizing the industry. I mean, we're talking about Nigeria First policy, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about Nigerians patronizing this industry. This is a very key point. So what's your strategy to get Nigerians to buy in and patronize the industry?
Yes, part of what, there are some fiscal incentives that we want to put in place to ensure that companies that are producing locally are not disadvantaged from companies when you compare that to companies that are importing,
Yep.
right? So the import duty must be structured in such a way that is not a disadvantage for the local players to be able to, produce locally. So, we're looking at those things. Wherever we see those discrepancies, we make a case to, the Ministry of Finance and Customs to ensure that those things are realigned. So we're putting those policies in the communique. Some of those things are mentioned in the communique in terms of fiscal incentives to ensure that, those incentives are provided for local players to be able to increase production.
And what's been their response?
Yes, it's been well received. It's been well received, and they're happy about that. There are always, demands and requirements to be able to produce more and more. And we're here to support them. We're here to support the serious players, people that are willing to, increase production.
So
we're here to support them.
Make your work easier.
Yes, correct.
And get you to get to your destination
Correct.
anyway.
Yes.
Let's talk about, challenges are part of life.
Yes.
And sometimes they become a spur to move you ahead. So what real challenges are you facing?
I think I'll say two. The biggest challenge is funding. I think, funding has been one of the biggest challenges that we faced. Firstly, the ministry, the budget of the ministry makes it very, very difficult for us to be able to implement a lot of the desires that we have. Hence, we have gone to try to source money from the private sector. And some of these assets is to position them to private sector investors, international investors, to be able to bring FDIs, because some of the required inflows and required investment amount are quite large. So we're working on that to ensure that we're getting the required funding to be able to enable us to actualize our dreams. The second thing is manpower. We've been able to train about 700 skilled manpower in terms of fabrication and foundry services at our training institute in Onitsha. What happened was, when we opened the application for those boot camp training, we had 225,000 applications, but we could only take 700. The reason why we took a very, very small percentage of the total amount that applied was, again, funding constraints. So these are some of the challenges. There's room, there's a lot of demand for those kind of skill sets, particularly in the East and in the North Central.
Oh, because I was going to ask you, why situate it in the East and not in Ajaokuta?
Yes, because because of the booming, there are a lot of artisans
there.
Yes, there. When they did the study, they found out that most of the artisans were in the East, so it was situated there to train them before they moved them to Ajaokuta. Yes.
Okay. What are the major steel raw materials in this country, and have you pass this information across to genuine investors?
Yes, the major steel raw materials, one is iron ore. The largest deposit of iron ore that has been found in one single location is the Itakpe iron ore, which is around 310 metric tons of reserves that is there. In addition to that, there are also, iron ore that have been littered around the country. So if you look at the total volume, is about 3 to 4 billion metric tons across Nigeria. And there's dolomite, there's clay, there's limestone. There are all these mineral resources that can be used for steel production, as well as cooking coal. That has not been found in large quantities, but we're working on studies, to carry out studies to ensure that those studies can help us to bring out and discover even more cooking coal across the country. So we're confident that can be achieved.
I hope this will then reduce our import dependence.
Yes, the plan is to reverse it. The plan, we have a 90-10 import ratio. If we can gradually move that to 70, 50, 30, a gradual process between now and 2030. That's our objective.
One hopes that you get there.
Yes.
The Minister of Steel Development, Prince Shuaibu Abubakar Audu, thank you for sparing your time to be with us on Arise Prime Time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Much appreciated.